you like me just to give a little background and then I'll let you lead off with some
Might
questions?
as well. Yes, please. Thank you. Tell us how you ended up here.
Well, it's an interesting story. If you could tell by my accent, I am not only transitioning between corporate to being my own boss, running my own marketing agency, but also I've transitioned in terms of globally. I was born and raised in the US, in New York. Have lived and worked abroad in the past, but spent the last 10 years now here in England. And so having had the real direct contact with both markets and colleagues in the US, the UK, Europe, and Asia, I think it's really an interesting time to be in digital, as in some ways the world has gotten quite small, and in other ways, when we look at things, and I'm sure you will throughout your course, look at things like cultural expectations, data permissions, etc., we still see we're a bit of a federation globally. So, but yes, so I started my career in marketing in the B2B professional services realm, working for a consultancy, and then moved into some of the larger corporates you may have seen mentioned in my CV, like Viacom and Pearson, so very heavily media oriented. And in terms of specialization, I've always been both a left and right brain type person. So while I enjoy creativity and I'm quite visual, particularly as a learner, but also I love numbers, and it's easy for me to get lost in a spreadsheet. And I know that sounds like a punishment for some people, but give me a set of numbers, ask me what they say, then that's when I really enjoy getting to work. So for me, direct marketing was really the specialization that called out to me out of all the disciplines within the field, because often you were looking at the analysis of campaign data to make sure that you were then budgeting, spending, and doing appropriately. Sometimes in the past, I've done as many as 1.5 million pieces of direct mail per campaign. So there you have to be quite precise with your numbers, both in terms of cost control, but also in terms of results and ROI for the business you're leading on. Now today, when we talk about social, you think, well, how did you get from direct to digital? Well, actually, if you think about it, a lot of the core skills are quite similar. So you're going to be looking at data, you're going to be looking at content, which then was the editorial and that creative. You're going to be looking at audience and defining who is the recipient of your communications. And you're also going to be, in some ways, presenting brand. So for me, that transition, probably I'd say back in the 2000s, was really quite natural. And of course, working with large globals, the appetite for digital was there early on. So I did get to make that transition and have lived happily in this space ever since.
Sorry, I'm talking to myself. How do you make that transition from these big organizations, you know, Barclays, Viacom, Pearson? How do you make that transition from those big companies to Wonderland? Wait, can you unmute? Can you unmute? Yeah.
I've done the same thing. Apologies. In a way, it was partially driven by some personal life choices and circumstances. But as I look back now, I can actually see the seeds being planted. So what lured me from large corporates, and we talked about some of those benefits, you often have bigger budgets and you have sort of, you know, blue sky thinking, and you can work with the best agencies and creative forces available to you. That's wonderful, but there are also some downsides to that in terms of expectation and not necessarily downsides, but challenges, and delivering really great results. And so I enjoyed it, and I enjoyed the kind of energy that comes from those environments. But what I also started to feel, and this was, I think, about 2009, 2010, because digital has been so closely aligned with technology and tech solutions, it turned out that I spent a lot of my time with tech entrepreneurs. So I had my corporate day job, I worked in digital marketing, and then in the evenings, I was out at meetups and on Google Campus and doing all the sorts of things you can think of, keeping my fingers on the pulse of tech. And entrepreneurs were saying great things like, wow, you know, we're out for investment. This is our third round. We've got this great idea. We've brought it to market. Nothing stands in our way. And I thought, oh, I might like to get into a little bit of that and see what that career path could look like, because I was kind of raised career. It meant you went to university, you got your degree, you worked for a large company, and you progressed until whatever that meant. But entrepreneurship is really just starting to gain validity. It was starting to open up to more types of people and backgrounds. It wasn't just for developers, right? So I didn't think a person like me could be an entrepreneur in that sense, meaning I didn't want to own a store. I wanted to be in the tech game. And so I think it was 2010 or 11 formally, I left corporate, I took the big leap, and I co-founded an interactive media startup. So that first transition played on my strengths, and if some of you are thinking about that, I would encourage you to do so. It was a space I knew well because it was media-based. This is before a lot of the things we take for granted. So for example, if you think about YouTube, people say, oh, I'll put that up in the cards. Or if you think about Instagram, you think how you can shop now your stories. It was pre all of this, and we were developing technology that would make that possible. So it was exciting, it was fresh. I wore 3 different hats. I was the head of marketing, which brought the product to the wider audiences and the marketplace, and really trying to get the appetite among the end users to adopt our technology solution. I was also head of product, which meant I then wore the consumer's viewpoint and tried to help the developers and UI designers create a product that consumers would want and would use. And I was also head of HR. So I was responsible for bringing on talent. But again, this is what you do in a startup, right? I had 2 co-founders and we all had our disciplines, but it's that wearing of many hats, I think, that stretched me in that kind of second phase of my career. So long story short, how did I then get to Wonderland? About 4 years into the project, we found that the company was making loads. I said, this is great. But when I looked at it, I said, you know what we're doing really well at? We're doing really well at developing software solutions, white labeled, meaning unlabeled with our own brand name, but on behalf of entertainment companies. And therefore, it wasn't quite the right space for me because we were spending less and less time on our own product. And more time on what was, financially more rewarding. And again, these are hard decisions to come to if you are then starting up in business with a team. But we had an adult conversation, and we sat down and I said, I'd really love to leave. I'd like to start my own specialist digital firm, focusing on clients and those needs. And so I exited. Still great friends, see them all the time. But yes, so that was my entrepreneurial journey off the back of my corporate journey, which then led to my starting up my own digital project studio.
Well, thank you for that. That really places it in a framework for us to understand where you're coming from. I mean, these different roles that you've played, you've seen how marketing works from all around the table. You've been head of marketing, you've been presenting marketing pitches, you've been the consumer, you know how marketing works from inside out, from all the different angles. So, I mean, this week we're focusing on that process of pitching a marketing campaign to, the decision makers, the bosses, the investors, the board of directors, whatever. And, this is where this is where we want to get some insight, some ideas, what is it like starting off? What is it like as the decision maker? What are you looking for when the marketing professional comes to you to pitch? What are you looking for first of all?
It's interesting, and I may say things that seem contrary to common assumptions. So one of the things is you might think, oh yes, if you're talking to the decision maker, they have all the power. And I'd say, let's unpack that a little, because yes, maybe as the head of marketing, as the head of product, I would be making and signing and authorizing expenditure. That's great. But the power is really in both of our hands. So you have something I don't have, which is the solution. I have the need. But there is a balance in that conversation. So as someone who's receiving maybe a pitch or even an outreach just to determine, is there need? What would that need look like? Could I support you? How could we help? I would say that I was always looking for, one, really good research, like know who we are. If I felt that the pitch deck, the outreach email, the cold LinkedIn connection request could have been copied and pasted 100 times, wasn't interested. Give me that little bit of curiosity that says, oh, I saw in your company literature X, that made me think Y. Start to make those connections early on between who we are as an organization and what your offering is. Because when we talk about getting to yes, that helps tremendously. Already starting to build those bonds and relationships. I was certainly looking for the basic elements. Is the right talent in place to deliver? So if you're doing social media campaigning, I want to be sure you've got the graphic design talent, or do I need to supply that? Do you have the analytics talent, or do we need a third party for that? Are you going to actively manage the accounts, or are you coming up with a strategy and then internally? So be really clear what portions of the opportunity or project you are able to take on, and that the skill set is there, either in yourself or maybe with someone you might be partnering with, because those are the basics you're going to need to see. Then there's that X factor, which is in the, do my eyes light up when you talk about what you do? Because your eyes light up. So the enthusiasm, the creativity, the innovation maybe that you bring in what you're doing. And always for me, because I am data driven, a statistic never falls amiss. Back it up with a bit of data. So if you say that Instagram is the only platform for your company, Ms. Martin, tell me why. But back it up with a bit of data. Well, 73% of consumers will review Instagram to find out about your product before they ever visit your website. Ooh, that's compelling. So if I'm not on Instagram, they're not going to come to my website? Ah, okay, then I can see that I need to bring you on board to sort that all out. And also, I think about the organization and its life cycle. So are you talking to someone who is very au fait with social media, and you might be either replacing an in-house person or augmenting their capabilities, but they've already had experience, versus a client you're pitching that may not, because you'll want to handle them very differently. For the one that isn't, be prepared to educate, be prepared to give them lots of examples, be prepared to handhold them much more, because for them the risk is not knowing and not having had the experience to compare and contrast to. A client that may already be perhaps doing really well on Twitter and other platforms, but maybe isn't on Instagram, and that's what you're pitching for them, translate what they have done into what you hope to do. So say, oh, I noticed on this platform, you did a campaign looking like this. Well, let's think about how this other platform you'd want to tweak, amend. Here are some of the nuances the culture of the platform, the analytics of the platform, the algorithms of this platform. So try and build on what you know about them and use that in your pitching so that they feel confident they're going to get a one brand message, right? Those are some of the things I looked for as a buyer or decision maker.
And now to flip it around, I mean, in the times when you've had to be the person doing the pitching, do you have any, battle stories that you can tell us about, when something that really, really worked or something that just absolutely fell flat when you went to present it? Do you have any any stories you can share?
Yes, the war stories. In terms of, again, as a small agency, meaning that I like to handle about half a dozen clients in any given time period, and I retain them over 6 to 9 months, generally speaking, sometimes longer, sometimes shorter. For me, every pitch is really tailored. And I do a lot of getting under the hood of their expectations before pitching. Now, this can be somewhat difficult if they are, let's say they're new to the specialization that you're going to talk about. So I can think of one client where, and this is a heavy investment, but again, when we talk about pricing and how you know how to value your time, I spent, I want to say, probably 2 working days, but split up over different sessions, workshopping with them prior to contracting what the project would look like. And in that time, I was putting in a lot of both contributions to their understanding and knowledge, the education piece, but I was also eliciting things. So for example, oh, well, who else are you speaking to about this particular need? Why is that important? Well, yes, you'd like to know who the competition is, but you also want to know, are they at the early stages of their investigation, decision-making? Very different, success rate for you if you think you can pitch once and win the business. But if you're the first voice they've heard from, it might be several months before they get around to hearing from others, if that's what they're opting to do. So knowing where they are in their process. We spent that time asking them what they had done in the past, what had worked well, and what were they not so happy about. And again, you can't solve every problem they may have had, but if you can find 1 or 2 where you have a unique way of addressing it, that's halfway to your yes. So that for me was very successful. And although I put in, let's say, the 2 days of time up front, it's paid dividends because I've retained them now 18 months. So that's when you start to think about what's the lifetime value of the client you're about to sign up. And then that helps you decide what goes well. Let me tell you about things that don't go so well, because I'm sure you're keen to hear that too. I got an opportunity to pitch for business with a professional services firm, a law firm. Now, I'm not going to make any assumptions about to come, but law firms are not necessarily the most progressive when it comes to their marketing. Again, they tend to be conservative organizations because what they deal in, the law, is quite regimented. It's based on precedent. It moves slowly, right? So the field in which they practice their business is very different to the world of digital. So I already sort of had my feelers up and was sort of trying to, in the pitch meeting, and this is after several phone calls and video conferences, but now we're at the time that I'm presenting a solution and I'm pitching for the business. And I could just see it was going nowhere. The affect of the prospective client. He was the head of the firm. I knew that the decision rested with him. It was certainly the kind of outcomes that I could produce. So, it wasn't outside my wheelhouse. I could just tell it wasn't going. And at one point I said, I feel like I feel like I'm not convincing you. And I said, but I don't want to convince you. I really want to understand what it would take for you to be convinced. And there's a real difference in that. Because if you push so hard that you're going to convince them, I think the personal reaction is to deflect from that. But if you say, well, what would it take to convince you, is a different way. And I found out, and this is where you also then have to know what your business stands for. And it turns out that the gentleman was looking for not a guarantee of the outcomes, but effectively a pay for performance. And this can come into social media, unfortunately, but a pay for performance pricing. So if I produce X, he will pay Y. And why I say run from those opportunities as fast as your little legs will carry you, it's because when you think about it, well, okay, time out. If this is the first opportunity and it's a legitimate client and you have the chance to do something on a very short-term basis as a portfolio builder, maybe there's something better than doing it pro bono, but it's only slightly better. And quite frankly, I would be more impressed as a decision maker seeing pro bono work in the charity sector and a sector based for need than to think that you had undersold your skill set for other opportunities. Okay. But that being said, run fast, because you're not investing in this other individual's business. And sometimes that's what pay for performance turns out to be, because you will have put in the work, you will have put in the creativity, you will have put in the hours, you will have built the relationships, you will have delivered, and they can say, well, I didn't shift X number of widgets, and that's what we agreed, so now I don't pay. And the reality is quite frankly, particularly if you have no runway, right? You have no historic evidence, you have no baseline of data as to what that organization can achieve with its branding, with its market appeal, with the quality of its widgets, be very hesitant. So I said, thank you so much for the opportunity. I'd love to keep in touch. I don't think this is the right piece of business for me, but I trust that you will find another professional who can serve you. And that, is it a failure? I didn't win the business, absolutely. But I stood my ground and I said, the value of my worth is such that I refused that opportunity, because to me, it really wasn't. It was cloaked. It was a cloaked or disguised pay for performance. This isn't multi-level marketing, right? This is your business, your career, your freelance life, your agency. So be wary.
I mean, that is a little bit scary, you know, when you think about, you know, going out into this world and they already feel they have the advantage. They think they know more than you. They think they have the money, that we're coming to them and we're asking them to trust us and to pay us, and they think we have the money. I liked it when you said, you know, a few minutes ago when you're saying it's a two-way relationship. The social media marketers are bringing the creativity and bringing the ideas to solve their social media problems. But then they feel sometimes the people holding the purse strings feel that their side of the relationship is the stronger side. But I mean, this budget thing, this money thing, it's really very tricky. You know, how can we move? How can we, you know, haggling, trying to figure out the price, how much to charge? How, you know, just now you were talking about they brought in this model of, you know, pay for what, how did you term, you didn't actually, it wasn't ROI. What was the term?
Pay for performance.
Pay for performance. What other way, how can we, what other ways can we not haggle? Can we negotiate? That's a better term. How do we negotiate a payment system that is beneficial for us?
Well, that is, it's an age-old question. But first I'd say, let's think about mindset. And if I go out to buy an iPhone 12 and the price is £1,300 for the model I want with 512 gig, nearly half a terabyte of data storage, and it's in the right color and it's got the 4 cameras, Apple tells me that that product is valued at £1,300. I can't go into an Apple store and say, hi, I've got £600. Can I walk away with the iPhone 12? So let's start with mindset. So pricing is the rate at which you expect to exchange for your value and for your services. You might say, but what about discounting? Certainly there's room for discounting. And I think, again, this is Cherryl speaking from Cheryl's experience on both sides of the table, that unlike consumer products, maybe like hand cream, where if you go into Boots, it might be 3 for $2, or Doritos, if you go into Sainsbury's, it might be 50% more free. When it comes to services, which we are a service business, it is my preference never to negotiate on price, but to reframe the project on inclusions and then reprice it accordingly. So for example, you pitch, you're pretty sure that you're going to get the business. You understand the budget, you've pitched within the framework of what you think is the budget. Let's say you think it's the budget. And the client says, great, I'd love for you to do that, but I'd like you to do it for 15% less. Right? That's effectively them asking for a discount. And I, first of all, run through some standard kind of investigatory questions. Don't say yes to win it. Don't say no to reject it. Ask a few questions. Well, thanks. Thank you for potentially moving things forward. It sounds like you're really keen to get started. I'm curious. Why are you requesting a discount? Is it a question of cash flow? So maybe it's that if they can afford half now and half in the next month, that's a cash flow issue, which again, as a business owner, you've got to be wary of all these terms. Aware of all these terms. So maybe that's about splitting up your billing and saying, I'm going to bill half on initiation of the project and half on completion so that their cash flow can flow over several periods. They say, no, it's not a cash flow issue. We'd just like to secure a discount. I see. Okay. Ask a few more questions. So what you're saying is you'd like to do less work together, or you'd like to do different work together. So start to kind of try and tease out. And what I would say is at the end of those series of questions, because you're not saying, I'm going to stand on my principles and this is my price, but I think I would come back and I'd say, let me go back to the drawing board. Let's see what I can draw up that fits that new budgetary requirement. And I'm going to pull out some of the things that I've put in that first proposal on a cost basis. So maybe I've allowed for graphic design that I then have to secure. So I need a third-party designer to do the graphic design for the social media content. Okay, well, if I don't use a third-party designer, my own time still costs, but maybe I'm not as qualified as a graphic designer, so I charge myself out as less. That's a possibility. Maybe I was looking at a heavyweight graphic designer, but I'll re-budget for a lightweight or a midweight. They cost different structures. And I come back and I say, here's what we can do within that budget. Say, I haven't changed my price. I haven't given them the appetite to ask for discounts. I've said, great, if you move the goalposts, I move the goal. Fantastic. And I think that helps you stay within your own integrity. I think that helps you be seen as a savvy negotiator. I think that helps you be seen as a professional who, like themselves and their own organizations, deserve to be paid for their work. So I would say don't negotiate on price, negotiate on campaign, inclusions, billing, the kinds of things that is easier for you then to look at the costs and say, I can afford to do that. If you negotiate on price, oftentimes you'll find that you're doing the work close to your profit margin or sometimes even at a loss. And again, if you're running a business, that only works for so long because you're eating into the health of your business. But think about it, you're also eating into money you could reinvest to grow your business. So this is sometimes why entrepreneurs will find that they have a good business, but it's not growing. And it's because their profit margins are so small that they don't have the money to reinvest in people, in technology, and so on, maybe in their own knowledge, continuing to educate themselves. So be careful about negotiating on price. The other thing I would say, and this sounds again, maybe a bit controversial, oftentimes, how do I put this? Those not so familiar with the economics of social media will assume that it's free and your time. Well, Twitter is free. I could do it. It's free. So I just, I'm just going to throw you a bone in terms of your time. First off, social media, as we know, can include organic and paid and mixes of both. So if a client comes to me and wants to do what I call dry marketing, which is no budget marketing, no budget means no marketing, right? Because a client that has already decided they have a budget is one that's serious about solving the problem. If they have no budget, but they come to you asking, what should we invest to get these results? Well, then that's a different story. That's great. That's an opportunity for you to educate, for you to sort of set their appetite. But if they say we have no budget, well, then how will you get the video content that you need to put on the platform? Oh, you're meant to film it on your phone and edit it and transcribe it and storyboard it and this is before you've posted the first thing, right? So you need production and media budgets for social media. You need content and copywriting budgets for social media. You need advertising budgets for social media. They don't all have to be enormous. They don't all have to be the same. But think about all the different types of work that go into creating a good campaign and say a budget is needed. Now, you as the provider could be doing all of those things with your skill set, but the client needs to be aware the budget must be set aside for it, and not that they're doing it off the back of you managing their accounts. Remember, managing social media is not doing the creative. Managing social media is not marketing. So how do you drive the traffic to get to the social media posts to generate the outcomes that they want? So think about that. So I say break it down. Now you could be, as I said, you could be billing for all of it. You could be producing all of it, but help them understand all of these things: production, media, advertising, traffic-driven search, for example, paid search, creative, copywriting, video editing, all of that goes in. All of that goes in.
It's the job isn't just being social media, not just managing the social media. You have to educate them as well. I've always been surprised that, when you go to the bigger businesses, you think that they are up to date and they've had enough interaction with other people to realize what's going on. And then when you come to the smaller businesses, because they have had that, attrition against those big businesses, they understand what it costs I mean, is it the same for you that you find that the bigger businesses are a little bit more impenetrable and the smaller businesses, they might have smaller budgets, but you have more freedom, more creativity, more, you can, be more creative with the smaller businesses?
Hmm. Yes, I mean, I do like them both, but for different reasons. One of the things I find is scale. So if I'm working for a client that, has a fully formed marketing function, sales function, operations, and so on, sometimes what you're doing in your domain, social media, you've got to tie it into all of those different places. Make sure the marketing team is happy with it, because it's not always perceived that social media and marketing are aligned. And oftentimes internally they are not. So marketing throws a brochure over the fence and social media team is meant to go make it live and make people interested in downloading it. Okay. But at the same time, was social media team involved in the strategy? Do they understand the goals and the purposes? So in a larger organization, you're wearing your domain expertise, you're wearing that hat, but you're also making sure your touch points are good, that you've got an ear in to the strategic conversation, you've got an ear in to the marketing and other deliveries. For example, although now it's a little bit reduced, but when event marketing was quite popular, social would often be seen as the warming up, the top of the funnel to get prospects and clients into an event, for example. So you've got to really be connected with those other parts. That stimulates me. I love people, and I love thinking through all the vagaries of what they want and need. With small businesses, small businesses and small business owners, I think, and I actually had a conversation like this yesterday. I said to a client, as we look forward to 2021, one of the things I see that has been part of our relationship in this past year was quite a lot of independence in creating campaigns and programs for you. And I just want to push that a little bit further in 2021. I said, I'd like to take you out of some of the tactical decisions that we really do set up like a 6-monthly plan, as opposed to a month-by-month review and here's what we're about to do and here's what we just did. Because with the smaller businesses, you want your client to, you want them to do all of their functions, their CEO, their head of delivery, they're overseeing this, they're doing that. You don't want to have that kind of everyday back and forth, back and forth, back and forth. It can slow you down. And so there, I think you want to kind of set big picture targets, big picture goals, get them excited for the vision, and then report back. And maybe the reporting doesn't need to be in a meeting. It might be in a formal campaign report that you submit on a monthly basis, saying, here's the target we set. So it might be, we'd like to get our brand mentions up by X%, or we'd like to launch a new and bespoke hashtag with, X amount of views, or whatever the case may be. But you could do that perhaps in reporting and get them really tied into the bigger vision so that they're not quite as hands-on. I think that can sometimes be it can put you a bit on the back foot with a smaller business, because for them, the business is everything, right? It's their all. So it's different than if you're working with a large corporate where you're one of many teams, and you, the CEO or even the person who brought you in will often say, great, thanks. And then they go off and do their role and you're meant to get on with it. So it's just some differences, and none is worse or better. It's just about adjusting to the different sets of expectations, maybe that come with size and scale.
Well, I mean, this is fascinating. Listening to you talking about, you know, the different ways that you have to just keep modifying your outlook. You modify your business, you modify your attitude to each client that you come to. I'm just hoping we can all be that flexible when we go out into the world of work. I mean, I'm coming into the questions from the students now. How do you see the future of social media in the next 5 to 10 years? What you were just talking about, that flexibility. How
Mm.
is do we have to be more flexible as we obviously flexibility is always a good option, but you know, are we going to be losing options? Do you think Google Plus might come back? Do you think Facebook might get, you know, reach its limit and start?
Yes.
I mean, what could happen? What trends do you see?
Oh, definitely record this part because I'd like to know, we can look back in 5 years' time and see. But one of the things I really think has been interesting is, I won't say the proliferation of social media platforms. We don't have, 7,000 of them. But I do see that the environment is such that, remember, remember is a strong word. There was a time when the web first developed that, there were 100 places to go, and then there were 1,000 places to go, and then there were 1,000,000 places, and so on and so forth. And I think some of the big ones will in fact bloat to the point where they can't really serve their audience anymore. And I find that specialist platforms, so Pinterest, for example, was a specialist platform born out of people initially who were quite visual and quite crafty. And so it was this sort of alternative search to Google, because Google is a word-based search, right? It's all about keywords, keyword density, and that's a huge part of their algorithms. Pinterest was search through visual cues. And so that served a community that Google did not. And now it's grown into something else entirely, and it continues to evolve, and that's great. But I'm seeing things like TikTok, and at one point Instagram was there as the challenger, where it's like, well, what isn't being served by one of the big 3, 4, 6? And those smaller platforms will be more nimble because they will come out of amazing sets of strategic insights, which are more available to us now than ever before. The amount of consumer data that we can think about before we ever put an app or a platform together, Facebook didn't have that. Facebook said, we're a couple of college kids. We want to see what other college kids are showing up on campus. We'll put some pictures up. They didn't have the insight, but they were first mover. I think what we'll see in the next 5 years is it's not about first mover. It's about using consumer insight and data to drive new platforms that niche down to specific interests, specific ways of seeing the world, specific interactions. And then what will happen? Well, like stories, the best of those new platforms will start to migrate across the others. LinkedIn has premiered LinkedIn Stories, one of the most conservative, staid platforms for B2B business users. Now says, well, maybe you might like to record a video and share it with your followers on a daily basis. Unheard of when LinkedIn was developed, but it took a cue from Facebook, it took a cue from Instagram and developed it. So I'd be interested to see where AR and VR start to not just be the province of gaming, but be part of our social interaction. So will there be a platform that starts off much like maybe The Sims, in a virtual world, but our interactions are there? Or artificial reality, augmented reality? Will there be a platform that will go specifically with Oculus so that you'll be able to not just swipe and purchase, but grab and purchase, right? So think about that. Now, the reason why it would develop outside of one of the big 3s or 4s is, I think, partially because, one, it will need huge amounts of money. So a lot of these businesses are not throwing off profit, right? They've got growth, they've got market cap, but they don't actually have cash. So to launch these new, you're talking about investment, and you're talking about a couple of really good angels, and then you're talking about maybe some VC money, and then so on and so forth. So that's why those kinds of things may develop outside of the big four, because the cash sits outside of them to get it done, to get these things up and running. But then they could be bought quickly, or they could IPO, right? So I think you know, we'll be seeing definitely some changes. But I would say that I think there'll be growth of new platforms on a steady basis. I think they will incorporate different CX, customer experience, and I think that they will come from cash-rich avenues like venture capital and so on, and then either become standards, and some of those features will migrate across to the other platforms that have the user volumes, or they'll be bought. That's my prediction.
That's a bit scary. Imagine Facebook buying Twitter and you know, Pinterest, and it would just be Mark, you know, the overlord. But, you know, and it's interesting thinking about, imagine if we stopped interacting with each other on phones and computers, and we just interacted in this kind of virtual world, you know, and we you know, we never had any, we don't have any physical interaction at all, not even, you know, that's a bit scary as well. We're coming into the last few minutes. If I'm just going to look quickly in the chat to see if there are any new questions. If anybody would like to type in any additional questions from what we discussed, but I have just a couple more for you, Cheryl. Just to get personal with you now, what is your preferred social media platform for marketing and online business?
It's funny. The one where my clients live is LinkedIn, and I love it for the reason that as a total addressable market, it's fantastic. I mean, where else can you reach the CEO of Coca-Cola and the guy who owns the auto parts store at the end of your road? LinkedIn. When it comes to what I relax on and what I love for conversation and exchange and dialogue, Twitter. I just think that it really is a platform for the now, and there's no major news story or breaking current events or social issue that doesn't get filtered through Twitter. I think LinkedIn, people can be quite reserved because it is professional, and they may like to hive their personal and professional lives. But on Twitter, I find that the dialogue is at times insightful and raw at the same time. But I feel like you really understand who and what and how the world is being shaped. And again, where else can you reach the CEO of Coca-Cola if he's managing his own account and the person who owns the auto parts store at the end of your road? It's Twitter. One thing I will say, though, is that with great power, in my opinion, IMHO, comes great responsibility. And I think that all of the social media platforms and all of us as campaigners on those platforms and as responsible marketers and as professionals who have ethics really have to push for truth and accountability for the content that goes up. It's not enough to take something down if the harm has already been committed. It's not enough to post again, in my humble opinion, a retraction some several days or months later. We know the stream at which messaging gets out. So let's use our ethical background. Let's use our force to make sure that those places continue to be safe and respectful and truthful. Because if we're relying on putting our brand into that environment, we want to be able to say to our clients, your brand is safe here.
I totally agree. And we have spent a lot of time talking about, making sure our social media is accountable. Mohammed added a question into the chat and I'll read it out. How has the current pandemic been for the growth of your business and the risks that you are taking? That's good. I really want to find out some more about Wonderland Digital. Tell us how has the pandemic affected the growth of your business?
Well, like many people, and January and February were the halcyon days. 2020 stretched out before us, and I was excited. I had just signed up, I think, 4 clients from October to December. Now, remember, my agency, I only work with about 6 at a time. So to sign up 4 and have existing, it was a rich time. And I don't mean wealthy rich, but it was rich in terms of, I thought about all the work we do together and so on and so forth. And to be fair, unfortunately, I lost about half of them due to them being part of the entertainment and hospitality industries. And it's just no coming back from that. Like, there's no reasonable way to say, I think you should prioritize your marketing over the furlough of your 20-year employees, or I think you should prioritize your spend on this new engagement versus making sure you can meet your buildings and rentals, things like that. So when payroll is at issue, when your lease is at issue, right, you just have to take an understanding. What it also meant was for those clients who I could see could potentially be impacted, but weren't necessarily going to be impacted, I got into high gear. And I brought them information about what was happening in their sector so that I could diffuse any generalized sense of panic where possible. So bringing them news about what was happening, bringing them news about what projections were in terms of, and that was about holding on and securing the relationship. It was about talking to them often. And around about, I think we were in lockdown in March. So let's say about April, mid-April, I actually came out with a formal pandemic plan. So I wrote to them and called them each to talk about the resilience of my own business, because I wanted them to know, they might think of me as a sole practitioner. My gosh, what if Cherryl gets COVID? Then does everything kind of go out the window? So no, I said I'd spoken with multiple individuals who were in my network, and I don't just mean to say in my network, but were practitioners I could rely on to deliver. So we'd had the conversations, they were keyed up, that sort of thing. I talked about my financial resilience as an organization so that they wouldn't wonder, well, we might pay her, but if she doesn't pay the third party that's related to this contract, we're out of pocket because she is not financially resilient or her business is not financially resilient. So I talked about operations, I talked about finance, I talked about the personal side. I got very, very real that, my husband was sheltering in place because that was a condition of keeping us as a family safe. So I didn't externalize it just to those things. I also personalized it. And the last part of the plan was to look at ways I could give them more value in the near term. So I said and I backdated it to the beginning of March and forward for each client. And it was slightly different depending on the contract and the engagement and so on. But I said, here are some value adds you can expect to see from me over the coming months. It will end in August. So I gave it a timeline. I didn't say forever and a day, because again, I wanted to bring people back to understanding what was core value. I said, it will end in August, but these are the things you can expect. And it was just a little tweaks. Like I thought, well, again, if you know your costs well, give away something that you control the cost of, where you don't have to mark it up very much. You can reduce maybe your markup, also reduces your margins, but this was about securing, keeping clients happy, keeping them going through. And as I said, I think that specifically, that kind of 4-pronged plan of operational resilience, financial resilience, a personal story. I also asked them what was their personal experience, where they felt comfortable sharing, and then having some value add in a short but fixed time period means I'm at 100% retention into 2021 of those who made it past the initial, yeah, we just can't go forward. So I'm very pleased with that. I feel very blessed by that. And I'm looking forward to bringing on new clients as a result, because the other thing is they're not just your client today, they're the people that are referring you tomorrow. Right.
Thank you for that. I'm glad to hear that business is, you haven't shut up shop. So many people have just said, that's it. I'm not going to do any more work, but you're keeping that conversation going, keeping the relationship going, even if the businesses that you're working with are on pause. When they're ready to restart, you're right there at the end of the phone, right there at the touch of a button. We have another question from Mohammed. Thank you very much for typing this in. I'll read it out. It's a little bit long, but stay with me. What tips would you give to us as students that are studying social media and are planning to go into the world of work, which evolves with social media, and how we could go through the journey which you went through? So what tips would you give to us going into the world of work of social media, and what lessons can we learn from your journey?
First off is every time is an exciting time, but I think no time more exciting than the beginning of your career, because it's this time when there's everything to play for, right? How you establish yourself. Will you go freelance? Will you join with 2 or 3 other practitioners as an agency and maybe offer social media plus other types of digital offerings? Whether you'll join a large corporate. So your pathways are tremendously varied. I think one of the other things that you're benefiting from is the increasing professionalization of your choices, so that we do understand, broadly speaking, what a social media manager does, what a social media, not to be confused, influencer does. And so being able to kind of separate the celebritization of social media with what it takes to build real campaigns that work for real businesses. Things are very different if you're, and again, I'm going to make some broad stroke assumptions. Things are very different if you're an influencer and you're living in your parents' home and you're working out of the top story or attic room, and PR companies are sending you lots of product to review, right? Getting those views and getting those likes and getting those swipe ups. It's very different than when you go to do that as a professional endeavor for a L'Oreal, or as a professional endeavor for a General Electric, right? Selling washing machines, right? No one's sending you a PR package with a washing machine in it, but yet they have to be represented in social media. So when you think about all the ways that sometimes we have narrowed our understandings in some ways, that it's about influencer culture, it's about celebrity, it's about luxury lifestyle. Most of us will not work in that sector. Most of us will work for everyday brands, like your cosmetics, like your consumer goods products, like your industrials, like GE. And we have to make washing machines and refrigerators interesting. And we have to make their Instagram sing, you know? Think about that for a refrigerator. So with that, I say that professionalization, that understanding, and the separation of those two, I think is really coming to the fore now. Keep your credentials up. Join your professional organization. And there may be many that apply, but whether that's CIM or as I'm part of the DMA or whatever sector might be appropriate, keep those credentials up, keep learning. You might say, but I just spend all my time learning. I couldn't possibly. Well, learning it can be formal, but it can also be informal. So for example, technology and platforms, maybe learn a bit of coding to go alongside. Maybe learn a bit of graphic design to go alongside. Because the fullness of your skill set means that you can understand and be more strategic, and also be really good at pricing things up appropriately, right? Because you understand all the inputs. So what tip, if I could boil it down to a couple tips: stay curious, stay connected with your fellow classmates, with your colleagues, with anyone you meet in a professional capacity. Yeah, and just stay true to you. So bring your ethics, bring your point of view, bring your mindset, your creativity, because in essence, no matter what size the client, they're buying you first and you're offering second, because it's you they have to believe can deliver that offering.
Wow. Thank you very much. That is yeah, that does give us a blueprint for, you know, what the students going to do once we're not students anymore, heading out there. Those are some really good tips. Stay in touch, keep learning, stay curious. You know, it's a good way to live a life. And I want to say thank you so much to Cheryl for joining our class today and for sharing that insight, sharing that, you know, the knowledge that you've gained from living the life that we want to live, and from so many different countries, you know, from America to here, and all around the world. There's so much that you have experienced, and that you're talking from a position of, you know, firsthand, not just stuff that you've seen other people talking about. And that's really, really valuable for us. So I want to really say thank you very much. And what we, you know, I will message you a bit later on, and we can go over, you know, go over any extra questions if anybody else sends anything in. Miss Ski said thank you very much.
I would encourage your students, if they'd like to connect with me on LinkedIn, I'm happy to drop that in the chat, or if you send them out regular information, for you to send the link to my LinkedIn. I've always really enjoyed mentoring, coaching, and working with young people. I'm a trustee for 2 youth charities because I really believe in growing our youth up the way we want to see them continue. So again, when someone makes that offer, take them up on it.
Definitely. And they can follow you on Twitter and Instagram at Cheryl Martin. My connection is unstable, so I hope you can still hear me. And we can find you on all over the place on social media, looking for Wonderland Digital. So thanks again, Cheryl, and we will keep in touch. Yes, so Mohammed says, thank you, it was a real pleasure, and he would love to get in touch with you on LinkedIn. So look out for these connections soon. What I will do, I will let you get back to your social media, digital lifestyle, and I will stay on.
I just published on LinkedIn minutes ago, so it's real, it's happening all the time.
So we will find you over there. So I will stay on with the students for a bit, and I will let you go, but thanks again for joining us in our seminar today.
It was my pleasure. Thanks, everyone. Bye now.
Take care, Cheryl.